What's up, Dark and Darker fans? Iron Mace has stated on the Dark and Darker website that the next update, Early Access Patch number 1, set to go live September 26th, will introduce sweeping balance changes that will affect almost every class, weapon, and item in the game. So I figured I would throw together a quick video speculating on what I think those changes are going to be and kind of what I hope those changes are going to be, and tomorrow we can see just how wrong I was. So I'm going to start by going through each class and making some predictions on what I think they might change. For Fighter, he did get hit pretty hard recently with a set of nerfs, and I think a large part of that was adding armor penetration to a lot of different weapons. I think personally they might reduce the amount of armor pen you can get on these different weapons to kind of reward building that physical damage tankiness a little bit more, so Fighter feels in a better state as a frontline tank. Now, this might be an unpopular opinion, but I also think they may nerf the sprint ability to make fighters a little bit slower. I think it would be fair to nerf sprint, but make the fighter a little bit tankier, so you kind of have to choose between the brick wall frontline tank, which is the fighter, or the high damage rushdown tank, which is the barbarian. This would also kind of align with their desire to slow the game down a little bit. Not that like rushdown fighters are a huge issue, but it would still align with that philosophy. But speaking of slowing the game down and the rushdown meta, onto the Barbarian. The Barbarian is definitely the biggest culprit when it comes to just the rushdown meta, and probably the biggest target for Iron Mace wanting to slow the game down is the Barbarian. So what I think they're going to do is nerf the Rage ability. This is the ability that grants the Barbarian a 15% multiplicative speed increase at the cost of taking increased damage. So what I think they're going to do is either decrease the speed increase or increase the amount of damage the Barbarian takes for using that ability. Personally, I like that there's a rushdown option in the game, but I wouldn't mind if the penalty for using it was a little bit higher. On to the Rogue. The Rogue recently has been demolished in the last hotfix patch. I think Iron Mace has a tendency to over-nerf things and then bring them back up once they see just how bad they've gotten. They did this with the Wizard a couple hotfixes ago, and I honestly do think they're going to do this with the Rogue too. I think primarily the buffs are going to be on the low end, either in the form of base strength or in the form of bringing daggers back up a little bit. I honestly think the high end Rogue is still pretty potent, but definitely on the low end, Rogues are out here hitting like a wet noodle, and their base dagger does the same amount of damage as a torch. I don't think it's going to stay that way. I think they're going to bring daggers back up a little bit, and potentially also the Rogue's base strength. Continuing the theme of controversial classes, next we're going to talk about the Ranger. So a lot of people have been crying for Ranger nerfs for quite a while now, and Iron Mace has not nerfed Ranger at all, and it's super interesting to see because if you look at the high roller leaderboards, Rangers really were not dominating. In fact, Rangers were probably worse off than Rogues, Wizards, Barbarians, pretty much everything except for like Cleric and Warlock. It's super strange to me because I play Wizard, and when I fight a Ranger, it feels like crap. Everybody hates being trapped. Everybody hates that Rangers can sometimes kill you before you can even feel like you're actually fighting them, getting close enough to do anything. And it feels super oppressive when they do well against you. But I've also played Ranger, and I've felt like crap when a Barbarian is able to just W key and demolish me. So Rangers are in a weird spot right now. Personally, I think at the high end, they're not going to change anything. I think they're going to leave Rangers where they're at. I hate them as a Wizard, but I also have seen the leaderboards, and I can't deny that they haven't exactly been performing as well as a lot of the other classes. That being said, on the low end, it's kind of like the Rogue, where it really sucks to fight a Ranger with a green longbow and get demolished. He has no other gear, but has the advantage of being a ranged character and maybe lays a trap, and you die. So what I think they're going to do is nerf the low end Rangers. And in my personal opinion, the best way to do this would be to lower the base strength of the Ranger so that just bringing a bow does not make you strong enough to demolish a team. You would have to have a little bit of other gear as well to get that strength up to the point where you can do damage. It's not as simple as just bring a decent bow and profit. And good God, man, I hope they do something about traps too. Now on to Wizard. Personally, I think Wizard's in a pretty good spot right now. I know he's taken a few L's recently, but Wizard is just consistently pretty good, and I think Wizard is strong mainly because you have a lot of options and tools in your toolkit. You can fight at a variety of different ranges. You can buff your teammates. you have an answer to most situations. The main one you don't have that great of an answer to right now is a ranger, or like a super tanky barbarian rushing you down. But overall, I think Wizard is in a good spot, so I hope they don't change too much. But they always nerf Wizard, so let's be real, they're going to do something. I think they've stated that they want to address damage reduction more, and what I think they're going to do is add different ways to get magic damage reduction now. So if they're rebalancing gear, I could easily see them adding higher magic damage reduction values to a lot of different pieces, or adjusting the values on stats you can roll on items, so it's actually possible to get pretty good magic damage reduction without, taking the perk as a barbarian or whatever. I guess that means wizards are probably going to get nerfed. What I would really like to see is a few more spells added, though I don't think this is very likely. On to the cleric. The cleric, I think, has been consistently strong for the longest of any class. I know there was a short period where Tranquility was really strong on Bard, and it didn't feel super mandatory to have a cleric. But for High Roller these days, I kind of feel like it does feel mandatory to have a cleric again. So they seem to just never nerf cleric, so it's hard to say what they would even do. But if cleric is going to be mandatory, he shouldn't be able to be like a buff ball tank. I think they should reduce his tankiness a little bit. Heals are super valuable anyway, so having him also be able to just stand there in the front line and box people seems sort of strange. I don't know if anyone's seen the Apollo videos where they buff ball the cleric in that comp and he just runs in and beats the crap out of everybody with his mace. I think that's stupid. I don't think the cleric should be doing that. So what I hope, even though their last patch, they increase his strength and agility and decrease his ability to heal a little bit, what I hope they do instead is kind of reverse that and make him less tanky and able to heal just as much. All right, now for the Bard. This is a super interesting one. I know they've sort of teased that they want to rework Bard again. I know the Bard in my party seems to think he should be a strong duelist as well as a team support. So potentially what I could see them doing is turning the Bard into a little bit less of a buff ball class and turning him more into that duelist type role. So what would that mean? I think that would mean turning more of his buffs into self buffs. Or maybe that's actually just increasing the strength of his self buffs relative to all of his other options. Last but not least, Warlock. So I actually think they're going to come out with a lot of Warlock perks and new skills. They kind of gave Bard this treatment last time. They came out with the Bard. He was in a crappy state. He had very few abilities and was clearly unfinished. And then in the next major patch, he suddenly was more fleshed out than a lot of other characters and had 20 spells or whatever. I think they're going to do the exact same thing with Warlock. I think he's going to have more spells, he's going to have more perks, he's going to have more skills, and he's going to be OP as fuck. Hell yeah. Oh, I guess that's not last but not least. Last actually is the Druid. I'm really not expecting to hear much or have anything released for the Druid. I suppose it's possible to do the same thing they did with the Warlock and the Bard, where they release him in an unfinished state, but I hope they don't do that. I hope they just keep him in the oven until he's actually ready, and when he's released, he's fully fleshed out and has sick abilities that are super exciting instead of being half finished and sort of underwhelming. The devs have stated that they want to release new characters or new classes with each major season wipe, and while this is kind of a major wipe, it's not on the 3-month schedule that they initially planned, so I really don't expect to hear much about the Druid in this patch. Next, I want to talk a little bit about High Roller. They've stated that they are interested in playing with the risk versus reward for High Roller, and when they did that, they also increased the cost of High Roller to 150. And in my experience, that made it so that lobbies were just dead. Nobody was playing High Roller when it costed 150 gold. For anyone who wasn't pushing leaderboards, that kind of just meant you were done with High Roller for the wipe. I know there was some people playing still, but when I would go in there would be 1 or 2 other teams, tops. So what I think they're going to do, or what I think this has taught them, is that people overvalue the risk component of going into High Roller, and if they want to push more players into High Roller, it's less about the rewards and more about how much you're risking to go in there. I think they're gonna reduce the cost back down to 50 gold. In my personal opinion, that's when High Roller seemed healthiest. You would get teams that were decently geared in there. It wasn't just the Giga Juicers. For the leaderboard, I don't think it's going to be available at launch. In in all the other patches and all the other leaderboard releases since early access started, I say all, there's only been 2. The leaderboard was not up on day 1. I think they're going to give this big balance patch a couple days to kind of stabilize. They're going to get rid of any exploits that come to light, and then they are going to initiate the leaderboards after like a week or maybe a couple days. Before we talk about items, I think the last thing I want to touch on here is just the map layouts. I think they've stated somewhere that they want to add more variety to the maps. I know they changed how the circle closes so that it can now close on the exterior portions of the map more often, which I think has added more variety to where the fights take place. But I think they're going to continue on this trend and either add new map layouts or adjust the way that modules spawn in some way. If it's not new layouts, maybe they'll make it so that there's actually just some amount of randomness in which modules connect to each other. I don't know if they're to that point yet, but I do expect to see either new map layouts or some adjustment to the way that the maps will feel while you're playing the game. All right, finally on to the items, guys. This is going to be the last portion of the video. I think we learned some super interesting things about items in this last wipe. Obviously, the defining portion of the wipe, in my opinion, was how legacy gear affected balance, specifically +3 all stats. I think most people agree that +3 all stats were a huge mistake, and increasing the difference between the highest end players and the middle and low end players is not healthy for the game. It feels like when you go into High Roller and you know you're going to be fighting against people with like +3 all stats in every single piece, you're at such a huge disadvantage that it's not just risking your 150 gold, it's not just risking your gear set, you're rolling the dice against a stacked deck, unless you're one of the juicers with that kind of gear. That's not to say you can't outplay people, you absolutely can, but it just feels like there's always somebody that has way better gear than you. I think probably Iron Mace caught on to that, and that's why they got rid of +3 all to begin with. So I really don't expect to see any buffs to the high end of gear. What I think they'll do, if anything, if they're going to rebalance all items, is going to be to squish the difference between the high end and the low end, whether that's only allowing +1 or 2 to physical damage to spawn on weapons, or just changing the base weapon damage values for everything to be a little bit closer between the low end and the high end. I don't exactly know what they're going to do, but I do think they're probably going to reduce that gap, if anything. Now, I think they also stated somewhere that they want to still look at damage reduction and make changes in the damage reduction department. I don't think they mean physical damage reduction here. I'm pretty sure they mean magic damage reduction. I expect that there's going to be new ways to build magic damage reduction in this patch, whether it's pieces of jewelry or just changing certain bases to have magic damage reduction built in. Right now, the only class you can really get magic damage mitigation on is the Barbarian, and I don't think it makes sense to only have that available to one class. I hope they don't go overboard. I hope this doesn't mean that Wizard sucks now because everybody is suddenly resistant to all your damage, but we're going to have to wait and see. But I really do expect them to add some ways to mitigate magic damage in this patch. Last change, I don't know if I think they're going to do this super strongly, but I think they also may tune back some of the armor penetration statistics they added to maces, crossbows, and other weapons. I think that fighters have suffered lately. Granted, they got nerfed a lot themselves, but also because the popularity of these other types of weapons that have armor pen have just gone up and up. I think you should be rewarded for building a lot of phys damage mitigation. And I think we can see by the rise of the War Maul Barbarian that they went a little bit overboard. But I think that wraps up everything I wanted to cover. We'll see just how wrong I was tomorrow. But until then, if you made it this far in the video, I appreciate you listening, and I wish you a happy wipe. I'll catch you in the next one.